You know, people are walking around, they have an identity crisis. They're going around picking out all kinds of different parts of the timeline and finding some level of affinity with the fact that they may have a bloodline, or that they may have some person who was crowned, or some kind of color or race that really has no base in reality, simply because people have given it a word, people have given it a name, but they mix up the timeline and not realize that all of you are from one race. All of you come from one place. But you just keep on disgracing yourself and disgracing others, and you keep on just finding yourself arguing and fighting for what? For what? Trying to find your identity, make yourself higher than the next guy, trying to make yourself feel good about yourself instead of looking inside yourself. Everybody has an identity crisis. We're going to see if we can unravel the problem, unravel the string, so that you can look inside yourself and live your own dream. So what's up, everybody? How you doing? This is your Coach Renz. I want to thank you for spending this little time with me. I was just rambling on in the first part on the introduction, but we are going to talk about the fact that most people in this world is walking around with some form of an identity crisis. Some form of identity crisis, whether they use it as a form of superiority over other people, or they use it as a way to oppress other people. Some people are trying to use it in order to make themselves feel better about themselves, when really, just look inside yourself. So we're going to talk about the alchemy of life, of finding your identity. But I want to thank everybody for being here. All my patrons, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all my everyone who subscribes to the YouTube channel, who subscribes to Facebook. You know, please subscribe to both. On Facebook is Coach Renz. On YouTube is larenzoreid. And for those who are patrons, I really appreciate you guys. So, and I want to go ahead and tell you right now, join me tomorrow night, January 8th. Join me on January 8th, Tuesday. I'm going to have Mystic Mama with me. Mystic Mama, Zaire Sav. She's a registered nurse. She's a midwife in training. She's a doula, a master herbalist. We're going to talk about womb health. She is the womb goddess. And we're going to talk about womb health. If you're suffering from endometriosis, infertility, guys, you may need to listen to this as well. You need to listen to this because you may be passing UTIs between you and your lady. So you need to listen to it as well, so you can gain understanding how to deal with cysts and all the other pathologies and just have a better intimacy. How about having better intimacy? How about making it better for, as she would say, get it tight, make it right. Get it right, make it tight. So join me with Mystic Mama. We're gonna that's gonna be Tuesday live on YouTube, Facebook, on YouTube, Facebook, Blog Talk Radio, The Alchemy of Life, as well as on our Patreon, Coach Renz Patreon. So I look forward to it. This conversation that I want to have with you, part of it comes from a comment that I received on my Uncle Tom's Cabin video. So if you haven't checked that one out, I'll link it up at the end of this video. But on my Uncle Tom's Cabin video, one person made a comment recently. They said that, like, well, why are blacks turning to Islam? At first I thought this was on my Hebrew Israelite one because of the way it started. But it said, why are blacks turning to Islam? Muslims started the slave trade when invading Europe and taking the Slavs, hence the name Muslims, hence the name, Slavs, hence the name Slavs. So I guess Slavs came from slaves, is what they're saying. I don't know, I have to check that one out. Let me know in the comments. Muslims also castrated men, then European men ended slavery, but get blamed constantly. Okay, there's so many jacked up things about this comment, but we're just going to look at it on a base level, and then I'm going to move forward and talk about this identity crisis that humans seem to have. It says, why are blacks turning to Islam? Well, you have to understand, you're talking about mostly black Americans and turning into Islam for the Nation of Islam and that sort of thing. You're talking about a time frame when black men and women were being disenfranchised by white America at the turn of the century. When black neighborhoods, a white person can just go into a black neighborhood, a white Christian can go into a black neighborhood and string up a black person just for looking, supposedly looking at a white girl. We know that with the Emmett Till that was a lie. You're talking about a time frame when it was hard for a black man to provide for his family because white people kept black people out of jobs and out of the ability to generate wealth. You're talking about after a time frame when black Wall Streets in South Carolina, Georgia, and Kansas were bombed by jealous white people who didn't feel that black people should have that. You're talking about a time frame when black people were being experimented on by our government down in Tuskegee and other places to see how diseases would affect these people. It would affect people. You're talking about a time frame when it was illegal for a black man to drive a white woman across state lines. So you want to ask, why would they turn to Islam? You're turning to Islam during a time frame when somebody was standing up there, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X were standing there saying that black is beautiful, standing there saying that black people have to take control of their own neighborhood, standing against the police department that was abusing them, standing against the medical departments that were not taking care of them, standing against all these things. So you had a black organization that was standing up to the imperialism of white America of the day. So that is why they turned to it, because what else were they going to turn to? White America has failed them. You supposedly was for them through the Civil War, but then you set up the Freedmen Bank and take their money and give it to white people. So, and then you promised 40 acres and a mule and never delivered. You promised freedom, but never delivered. So why would they not turn to a group that is pushing for that? Of course, black people turned to Islam during that time frame. Many stayed stuck to Christianity, but most stayed stuck to Christianity. But of course, millions turned to Islam, and with justification. Was it Muslims who were oppressing black people in America in the 1900s, in the 1800s? No, there was no Muslims holding slaves in America, or at least none on record that I could find, holding slaves in America during the 1800s, the 1700s, or the 1600s. The ones holding slaves, black African slaves, black indigenous people slaves in America were white European Christians. And they only ended that because it was financially unacceptable. It was financially laborious, and then it became morally unacceptable to some. And the only reason, like Lincoln said, if he could have saved the Union without ending slavery, he would have. So white America didn't say, the grace of God has come upon us, and we're now going to free all the little Negroes that we've kept in captivity. We've built our great land and financed the building of this nation on their backs. We're going to free them, and we're going to give them equal opportunity to be able to be self-determining. That didn't happen. White people didn't end slavery because of some grace. They ended slavery because of economics and because of a war. And then we still saw Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws still abound. We still saw black people, you accuse a black man for rape, he's guilty. You accuse a black man for anything, he's guilty. We still see police brutality in the black neighborhoods. And I can't even call them black neighborhoods because we don't own most of the land. So if we don't own the land, it's really not a black neighborhood. You just happen to live there. So you ask, why did they turn to Islam? It's quite evident. Why would I have turned to Christianity when Christianity was brutalizing me, was killing me, was making life more difficult for me, was saying that on that video, Uncle Tom's Cabin, hey, you want to buy your freedom? Fine, 600 pieces, $600. Oh, you gave me the $600? I want to change it to 1,000. I'm going to tear up your paperwork. Why would you remain in that? A crooked, corrupt system that is backed by a religion? And the religion did back it. And I know people are going to say that, well, they weren't practicing true Christianity. All right, when were they? Tell me a time frame when true Christianity was being practiced. Please, please. Because in every instance that you may name, I will show you exactly how it wasn't practiced according to the book. But here's the thing about it. Even if you practiced it according to the book, it says, make slaves of the foreigners in your land and you can pass them along to your sons. Those that you conquer, you can pass those slaves unto your sons. If you beat your slaves and they don't die and they can get up in 2 days, no punishment should come to you. But if you kill them, sure. Now, the only people that had really strict rules were if you made slaves of your own people, which is why the Anglo-Saxons made indentured servants of the Irish and the Italians and other Europeans, because they saw them as their own. So you ask why? Now you said Muslims started slavery, the slave trade, when invading Europe and taking the Slavs, hence the name Slavs. Okay, so basically the Moors, the Arab nation who became Muslim through Malik. Was it Malik or Ibn Sahi? I think Ibn Sahi's tried, but Malik was actually able to do it. And they came in around the 700s? The 700s. You're saying the Muslims started slavery in Europe in the 700s. You missed the Roman Empire, who enslaved millions of Europeans as well as Arabs and blacks and Asians and everybody else. The Romans had slavery all throughout their civilizations. The Greeks who came before the Romans had slaves throughout their entire civilization. Egyptians, they had slaves. It's only this, and I'm not talking about the Hebrew slave, because that's only in the Bible, it's in the Abrahamic religion. There's no other evidence of that. But they did have slaves in the Egyptian dynasties and the kingdoms. They had slaves in the Sumerian kingdoms. They had slaves in the Chinese kingdoms. Slavery has been around long before the Muslims came in, the Moors came in and conquered parts of Europe, the Iberian Peninsula and the Italian Peninsula. They were long before that. So, Muslims started the slave trade. We pick out certain parts of history that fits our narrative, evidently. And you're not the only one. I'm not blaming Europeans for this. Black people, Asian people, everybody does this. They pick out parts of history that fits their narrative. Oh, we're starting at this time frame because we want to ignore the stuff that happened in the past. You know, he said then European men ended slavery but get blamed constantly. Who had the most recent form of slavery? Now, I'm not one to say that European slavery in America was the most brutal slavery, because if you study Roman history, the Romans were pretty damn brutal towards their slaves as well. And it was not uncommon for them to have sex with all their slaves, to use their slaves basically as fluffers, and to cut off arms and limbs and stab out eyes and scar them. So the Romans were very brutal as well in their slavery. So I'm not going to say that America had the worst slave trade, but it had the most recent brutal slave trade to people of color. You ever wonder why? You ever think about this? I know you don't. Asian people, they came to California, to the West. You ever notice they never ventured into the South for the most part? I can't find records of Asian people being in the South during the time of like the 1700s. Like they stayed out West in the 1800s. They stayed out West. They knew not to come and mess with these white Southerners. Why? Because they would probably end up as someone's slave. Because white Southerners could just take you as their slave. You're not white, you're my slave. What was your recourses? You didn't have many, if any at all. Very rarely was somebody able to plead a case to get out of slavery, of being unjust slavery. Very, 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 very rarely did that happen. What is this? Grass-fed meats. You need to do some studying. And when you study, stop studying with a place already in mind, a landing point already in mind. Study free. Study free of that. You know, saying that I just want to know. I just want to know the answer. That's all I want to know. Just give me the answers. Just give me facts. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this identity crisis. Because nothing against a lot of the brothers and sisters that I see on my Facebook timeline that are discussing the fact that black people, we're indigenous to America. All our connections are not African. Some of them even as far as we're not African at all. Okay, here's the thing about that. Were some of the indigenous people in America made into slaves? Were they taken over to Europe into slavery? Yes. But let me say this. To say that you have no connection to Africa is saying that the African slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen. Didn't happen at all. Some people go as far as say that 6 million slaves were the indigenous, 2 million slaves were the African transatlantic slave trade. Your records don't match up. Your records don't match up. All right, there's more than 2 million slaves that came across the Atlantic from Africa. Your records just don't. I mean, and they had to keep these records, these cargo records, accurate because these were corporations. They had corporations. You know, this is when corporations came about. These corporations had to keep their documents in order for taxation purposes and for liability purposes. Not because they were trying to be good record keepers of the black people that they stole or bought from Africa. No, they did it for taxation reasons and for accounting. I mean, it was part of the government. You couldn't just roll your slave ship up, dump them out and be like, yep, we here. You know, we got 50 of them slaves. Don't worry about it. No, there were people at the port. We're counting. We're taking taxes out on you. We're counting the number of people that are coming into this country. You know, they didn't have what we have today, but they had their version of border patrols. So don't going into that tangent. But I'll give you that you got people that some of the indigenous people were made into slaves as well. Now here's a problem. Here's a thing that I find interesting. I've always grown up hearing black people say, well, you know, I got Indian in my family. You know, they got Indian in their family. Okay, you do. I do. My children and myself, but especially my children, they probably have enough Cherokee Indian in their family between my side of the family and their mother's side of the family that they could probably make a claim to the Cherokee Nation. Their grandfather on their mother's side is like 3/4 Cherokee Indian. My grandmother was like 1/4. My grandfather was like 1/4, and then my father's family got some. You know, it's like a whole. So my kids got like just a whole big bag of it, right? But I would submit this: if your family history has been in America longer than the 1800s, you probably got a lot of African in your family as well. All right. If you claim that they mixed up, this is why I'm saying this timeline. They mixed. The slave owners bred slaves. This is a good strapping buck. We're going to let him breed as much as possible with the other women, with our other slaves, especially when the transatlantic slave trade stopped. And the only way you can maintain your slavery in America was, I don't know the exact year. Somebody find the exact year. That the only way you can maintain your slavery in America was now to birth your slaves, to treat them like cattle. And I pissed some people off like 20 years ago when we was talking about the Olympics, and they was like, why is it that America is like so athletic, or all these black guys, all these black people, they're so athletic, but Africa, if it's all about being black, Africa is not as athletic with their talent. And this is like back in the early 90s. So whatever Olympics would happen around that time frame. And I told him, I said, have you ever considered that in America, black people were bred like horses? We were bred like cattle. We were bred. So the strongest males from like the 1500s up to the 1800s, the strongest males got to breed with more women than the weaker males because it was property to them. It sounds horrible. It messes with your sensibilities, but it's just what it is and what happened. So when you look at the whole continent, the continent of Africa, you didn't see that. You didn't see that. You weren't bred. They weren't bred like we were. So now, of course, since the 1800s to today, that is diminishing. That is diminishing, which is why you have other nations catching up in the physicality of Americans, because the breeding stopped. Now the breeding is not controlled by the slave owner. So that's, you get that. And like I said, I know that some of you are going to be offended by that. And you're probably going to say all kind of jacked up things about me in the comments, but prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Fine. We all know it. We just don't want to admit it. Now, here's the thing. If your family's been here past the 1800s, you got black in you. You got African in your family, okay? Just like you got Indian in your family, you got African in your family. And if you light skin, you probably got some white people in your family, all right? You might have some Asian in your family. So you're going to have a mixture. It it cracks me up when I see light-skinned people saying that they just pure black and got to keep the bloodline pure. Okay, here's the thing. Ain't nobody's bloodline pure. Nobody's bloodline is pure. As far as what we have decided is a race, what we have decided is nationalities. Because these are all names that we give and they change. That's the thing about it. They change. At one point, nobody would have been saying, I'm an American. Because guess what? America didn't exist. Do you think when the Europeans came over, the Hopi, the Cherokee, the Blackfoot, the Sioux, they weren't saying we're all Americans? No, they were their tribe. They had already separated their identity from when they first came to this side of the world. They were different tribes, separated. Do you think, look at Anglo-Saxon, Europeans, British people, English, they separated themselves from the Scottish and from the Irish. Hell, other than the accent, for the most part, they look the same. They all have the same. They all came from the same place. They all have, if you go back enough in their histories, they're going to have the same history. But let's go even further. Whether you like it or not, you can pick any point in history you want to. But the truth of the matter is, for what we have right now, genetically, biologically, artifacts, everything else, the human race began in the absolute southern Africa, mid to southern Africa, south of the Sahara. That's where the current version of humans, 26,000 years ago. That's for our records, 26,000 years ago. For artifacts, 200,000 years ago. That's where we start. And now I'm not even gonna talk about that Lucy find. That was an ancient chimpanzee. It's not a human. But Africa, that's where it starts. Everybody. So if you want to keep the bloodline pure, then you have to understand that everybody got the pure bloodline, because every damn body started from the same point. But here's the problem. We pick times of history and we pick moments of oppression and moments of high. All right. Because if you talk to a Chinese person who is still of the mindset of how the Japanese had conquered China and treated them like dogs, would allow dogs to have a better life than a Chinaman, thought that Chinese people were weak, that they were frail, they were sickly, that they were subhuman. The Japanese imperialists treated Chinese people that way. So if you find an old Chinese dude who is still connected to that time frame, guess what? He is not calling a Japanese dude his brother and that they came from the same mother. Not doing that. He's not going to do it. In the same way, one of my aunts, right? She grew up during segregation in the South. She remembered being treated and being spat on while she was walking to school by white kids on the bus going by. And I remember 20 plus years ago, her and I having a conversation. She was like, I can talk to white people, but I never trust a white person. A white person, I can work with white people, but I never trust a white person. That was what my aunt said. Am I mad at her? No. I look at how she grew up. I look at the circumstances of her growing up. She grew up in a different era than I did. By the time I became conscious and aware of races and all that kind of stuff, right? We were already integrated in schools. I started school integrated, right? I was born in 71. I didn't start school with, I never saw segregation. You know, I went to class the first day and there's a white kid right there. And there's a white kid over there and there's the one Asian kid that we had and everybody and all the black kids. So I grew up in an integrated world. Didn't have the same problem. I didn't notice those things. It didn't start happening to me until I was about 8, 9 years old, when you start getting called names and you start recognizing that somebody is being derogatory towards you. It was after that, right? But that was the minority. That wasn't the majority. My aunt grew up when the majority of white people looked at you like a dog, right? So totally different. So I understand her perspective. Now, I'm not saying that white people are all great. I'm not saying that our societies are all great. Because just as well as I can pick out some white people who did some jacked up things, you can find some black folks who did some jacked up things. And a lot of people like that, well, they only learned it from the colonizing white people. No, some black people did some jacked up stuff in Africa well before the white people got down there. Some black people did some jacked up stuff in the Americas well before the white people got there. The white people did some jacked up stuff in Europe well before the Muslims got there. Everybody did some jacked up stuff in their own land because why? Because humans are just jacked the hell up, period. They're jacked up. Humans will be mean as shit to one another if given the opportunity. Greed is something that humans can't seem to get past. Insecurities is something that humans can't seem to get past. Superiorities is something that humans just can't seem to get past. But the problem is that we put a stake in the ground based on these nationalities, races, lands that your ancestors came from. And here's the thing, people. Here's the alchemy of life. At the end of the day, it's great. I can look back at Mansa Musa and see a black man who was wealthy as all get out. I can look at Akhenaten and see a black man who was spurned by his father, but when he became king, he started the mystery schools and took Egypt from polytheism to the monotheism of the Aten and built new kingdoms. I can see that and I can I can look at Martin, I can look at Malcolm, I can look at these other brothers who invented stuff and they built stuff and they came out of nothing and they did everything. You know, I can say, and I can say, that's great. But here's the thing about it. I can do all that. But if I don't find that greatness inside me, all that don't matter. You guys can call me, what's up, king? How you doing, king? What's up, king? And I'm like, what's up, queen? What's up, king? We can do that all day long. But kings have kingdoms. Kings have kingdoms. Queens have queendoms. If you ain't got a kingdom, you ain't a king. If you ain't treating your lady like a queen, you ain't a king. If you ain't treating your man like a king, you ain't a queen. If you ain't treating your family, your neighborhood, you ain't owning shit, then you ain't a queen. Sorry. We say all these people coming in, they gentrifying and taking our neighborhoods. They can't take something that you don't own. They come into our stores. Do you own the store? They put a Walmart in the neighborhood you happen to live in. That's not your store. That's the Walton family store. They put a Burger King in your neighborhood. That's not your store. That's whoever owns that store. So, where your kingdom at? You want to be a king? Build you a kingdom. You want to be a queen? Build you a queendom. You want to be a king? Find you a true queen who can build an empire with you. You want to be a true queen? Find a king who can build an empire with you. You don't own the land? You ain't a king or a queen. You don't own the business? You ain't a king or a queen. You got to own shit in order to be a king or a queen. Because that means, see, kingdom means you are a king. You are authority over the dominion. You have dominion over something. Just having dominion over your words, that's good. But you got to transform them words into material reality. That's alchemy, bruh. That's alchemy. Transforming your words to material reality. You saying that you're a king, but you can't say 10% of what you earn. You ain't got no financial alchemy going on. You say that you're a king, but you physically abusive to your queen and all your prince and princesses. You ain't a king, bruh. The alchemy of kingdom is not in your mind. It's not in you. Well, it's in you. Let me not say that. It's in you, but you ain't accessed it yet. It's like the Hindu story goes. The Hindu story goes, and I did this on Storytime with an Alchemist before. When they asked Brahma what's the best place to hide the crown of man, the Godhead of man, Brahma told them the best place to hide the Godhead of man is in the one place man will never think to look. Inside himself. Right? So if you want to stop having your identity crisis, if you want to stop arguing over if you're indigenous or if you're not indigenous, if you're from Africa, if you're the Olmecs, the Zai people, you want to stop arguing over the Zulu and the Ashantis. You want to stop arguing over Egypt and the Greeks and the Romans, the Irish and the British and the Scottish. You want to stop arguing over all that stuff in the past that is good for learning if you're learning from it. But it ain't got nothing to do, really, with you building you and you building your neighborhood and you building you building up a king, you building up a queen. It ain't got nothing to do with that. It ain't got nothing to do. That's just good stuff to have. It's just good stuff to have. But if I can't make you understand that you have a king and a queen inside you, if I can't make you understand that you got a Godhead inside you, that you are divine, that you are the alchemy of your life, that you can transform every thought from lead to gold. You can transform your finances from lead to gold, from broke to wealthy. You can transform your health from poor to outstanding. If I can't get you to understand that you are the king of your own kingdom, the queen of your own queendom, then all of that other information is for naught. And all of that arguing is a waste of your time. Yeah, it might make you feel good because you got your point out. But at the end of the day, what you building? What are you building? You know, that's why, you know, the Temple of Wisdom, you know, the thing is it's about building people up, period. Not standing on somebody, not stepping on somebody's neck, but it's about building people up by giving them that inner knowledge, that inner understanding. If you don't develop that inner understanding, then the alchemy of life is just not part of your being right now. And like the Buddhists say, you ain't got to be a Buddha this time around, or maybe next time around, you'll become a Buddha. You'll get the Buddha head. That's just a teaching of theirs because they do reincarnation. Don't worry about it. You don't get it this time. You don't want to be a monk this time. Your next life, you might be a monk. But all I'm saying is, we don't know. So it's best to take the opportunity that you got right now, and start realizing that we can argue all day, argue. But if I'm arguing with you, then I'm separating myself from you. And I have no desire to separate myself from anybody. Now, if you treat me foul, I do subscribe to Malcolm's thought process after he left the Nation of Islam. I'll work with you if you're willing to work with me. But if you try to stab me, I'm going to shoot you. If you sick your dog on me, I'm going to run you over with a truck. Whatever you do to me one time, I'm going to do to you 7 times over. I can work with you, I'll help you, I'll build you. But if you trying to hurt me, then you got to get hurt. And I always say, if Jesus keeps you from killing and raping my daughters and my son, keep your Jesus. If Allah keeps you from stealing and breaking into my house, keep your Allah. But if you are looking for something deeper, then look inside yourself. But I'm not, whatever religion you want to have, I don't care. We can work together still because it's about building the neighborhood, building the community. It's about owning. It's about building and getting ready to build other nations. It's about building other nations. It's not about me trying to step on anybody, nor should it be about you trying to step on anybody. And at the end of the day, you can claim indigenous American all you want to. That's fine. That's great. But here's the question. Do you have enough firepower, enough lobby power, enough money power to make that a true claim government-wise? Okay, because you can claim indigenous, but you're not going to get a casino like the Cherokee and the Sioux and the Blackfoot. You're not getting a casino. So unless you can make a claim that is recognized by the government, all of that is just air. All of that is just make you feel good. If you can't translate that into a casino, into land, into business, into grants, into forming your own nation, then it's what's the point? Because I can tell you this, if your bloodline don't measure up, the Cherokee Indian, the Sioux Nation, the Blackfoot Nation, they ain't letting you in. They're not going to let you in. All right. On the rare occasion, you might see somebody who look like me get in. But for the most part, I'm not getting in. I got to go through hell and high water to prove that thing. So unless you're going to get together, get a coalition together and create your own nation so that you can force the government to recognize your indigenous nature, your indigenous claim. And then you get land and you build your compounds, you build your own schools, you do all that. Then, hey, shout to the high heavens that you indigenous. But if you ain't doing that, if it's just shouting, I'm not even listening. Not even listening. So let's get ourselves into our kingdoms and our queendoms. Let's organize, let's buy, let's build, let's create business, let's create what actually makes things happen in this world, which is money and power. Because that's what it takes in order for you to build your school, in order to get the police attention and get them to stop shooting our kids and stop shooting adult grown men and choking folks out. It takes money and power. People claim that I just love money. No, I love peace. I love freedom. And the only way you're going to get peace and freedom in this world is you got to have money and power in order to do so. So let's understand the alchemy of life and the alchemy of society and move from this lead-based way of thinking and elevate to gold. That's the only way it's done. So I look forward to it. Let's keep talking. And like I said, join me tomorrow night, January 8th. If you're watching this after this, go find that video. January 8th, Zaire Saab, the womb goddess. I've learned so much from her over these last few weeks about womb wellness and how it affects us men as well. It affects us, dude. There's something I'm gonna tell you guys in that conversation. You wanna hear it. So y'all have a great day. Remember, you gotta free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non-negotiable.